Hi, welcome back. We are going to be talking now a little bit about why it is what popularity is so important. How come this is something that is affecting us so much when we're young? And how come it's something we seem to kind of gravitate towards for the rest of our lives? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. One thing I'm going to point out is the idea that this has become really explicit. Have you ever noticed recently if you are on the web, there's a lot of information about what's trending? Whether you are on Twitter or whether you are just even looking at a news story or anything you see, you'll sometimes see this graphic that talk about how many times has a story been tweeted or how many people have liked it on Facebook or how many comments are there, and often that right at the top of a story. In fact, even after you are done reading the story, there may be those icons again, encouraging you like you should tweet about it, you should like it on Facebook. Why is it happen? We've kind of almost ground a constant tweet. I think one of the reasons why this is happening is because it's based on this fundamental premise that if we see that a lot of people are really interested in something, we will think somehow it's good, it's important. We want to do what everyone else is doing, even if we resist that idea and we think, no, I'm an individual, I don't just conform. Still, we kind of a bit influenced by that. We think, well, if that's something that 3,000 other people have liked, then it must be something really important that I need to look at. It's the same thing when you watch a commercial and they say this is the number one movie at the box office. We're really trained to pull on the idea that is popular and therefore that means is good. But why does that work so well? Why do we even care about the fact that everyone else is doing it? I mean, I want to read the news story that I think are of interest to me, and I don't think my interests are going to be the same 10% as the people that read the same news story. So why was automatically then that's important? It turns out that a lot of this might have to do with the way that we develop as a species and the way that we can think about what is will took a step way back and thought about this from an evolutionary perspective. So let's go back to the world of cavemen and saw women and really thought about what life was like at that time, because that's how we develop the brains we have today. Even though that's a long time ago, that not very long ago from the perspective of our biological development. So there are a lot of ways that what happened back when is still influencing us today, and it's still influencing how our brain work. So have you ever noticed how if you yawn then other people around you will yawn? Yawn's a kind of contagious. Or have you even heard that when women live together in close quarters or spend a lot of time together, their menstrual cycle will start to synchronize? What all has to do with the some idea here is we sense what when we were cave people a long time ago, we quickly learned that we're going to do a lot better if we live together and if we kind of pay attention to signals from each other. So if you think about it, if you want or your own, well, you would have a hard time getting food right. And if you got food and you killed something like giant wild beast or whatever, you're not going to be able to eat all of that all by yourself. So it's really inefficient. And if you try to save the rest of it, it's going to spoil and you are going to get sick and die, and evolutionally you are going to be weeded out. So we really learn that when it comes to food. Same with safety, perfecting one another, or when it comes to other ways of coordinating activities, like when should we all go to sleep. That way we can all go to next part of where a nomadic group, so that help us get to the next part of where we're trying to move to. It would be good if that was all synchronized and we were in herd and we learned to be herd. And the more you stand in the herd, the more you sleep when everyone sleeps. That why we can all work together and move together at the same time. The more that everyone stops to give birth or to conceive new babies, that should all happen at the same time. We should all eat together. We should protect each other. If you are living that hurt, then whose thing will be strength. You won't get food. You won't be safe. You won't stop at the same times as other, and you may get kicked out. You might be alone. You might be unsafe, and this not go for you. The people that did this, they are weeded out through natural selection. We up all the people that survive by learning to pay attention to what the herd has to say. It turns out that this has had a really cool, indelible effect on how our brain put together. But we just recently discovered this in ways that we can't or didn't even expect. So there have been a lot of research that have been interested in understanding how the brain works, and in particular, there have been a lot of people that have looked at how the brain kind of lights up in an fMRI. Let's say when we experience pain. So what I mean by that is there have been a lot of studies where they have asked people to lean down in fMRIs. They kind of lean there and they show them a screen over that hurt and they give them on an opportunity to experience some time of stimuli. Now in some cases those might be real life stimuli. So while this hand is sticking out of the fMRI, they might get a little prick or some sort of a painful stimulus. And when that happens, the fMRI would allow them to see what areas of the brain are keen of lighting up. And what we learned was very reliably for a very long time. We've seen in research that there are particular areas that tell us that we experiences pain and the areas that tell us it's time to start regulating this pain and doing something about it. Now the parts of our brain that signal pain. It's really important because the pain is our voice of. It's the brain way of telling us something very serious is happening. You need to do something about it. This is going to shorten your survival. So pain is kind of the most powerful signal that our brains can give us to tell us that if we don't do something soon we may die or our species may be in trouble. Well, an interesting happens. So there are some research, including Naomi Eisenberg from UCLA, who decided to do some studies looking at people in the fMRI mission and the magnet, and they asked them to, instead of getting real pain, they asked them to participate in some instructions where they were getting excluded by others. And the way that this worked was sometimes there were real people that folks you're communicating this while they are in the magnet, and sometimes that you're just praying but with the experiences but it together. So the person in the fMRI magnet saw that they were being excluded and that other you're choosing not to interact with them. So in a way it was kind of like this. They were getting a signal saying you're getting kicked out of the herd. You are not part of the group anymore. You are getting excluded. It turns out they are very surprised to find that when people got the signal to say that they were getting excluded, the parts of the brain that lit up were the parts of the brain that light up when we experience real physical pain. And this kind of led to the idea that there might be something called social pain. We experience social exclusion in the exact same way that we experience physical pain. In fact, there's even a research to say that if you take a Talon, then that help your social pain go down, just like it help your physical pain go down. So maybe this is why even the way that we say it in English, our languages tend to mirror the idea of pain. We talk about heartbreak or homesickness. It's the idea that we experience physical symptoms from a social rejection experience, so it can't object that there's some way that the lack of popularity make us experience pain, and your brain is telling us with its most powerful thing, you need to do something about this. Don't get kicked out of the herd. Make sure that you are safe. It turns out that there's some other research also that has to do with our DNA that found that this is even more powerful than we even realized. But before we talk about that, I just have to tell you briefly about something that really new, and it's the idea of epigenes. Epigenes is really the sense that while we all have our DNA and every single cell in our bodies, hey, DNA its nucleus. That DNA, not every gene is turned on. Some genes turn on later and some genes never turn on. But what we've recently learned in epigenetics is that sometimes what makes those cells turn on certain DNA is something that happens in our environment. So believe it or not, someone could walk in the room. They could say hello to, or they could say something not pleasant to you that kind of reject you. And that will actually affect what happens in your own cells. And the reason why this is important is because, as you probably know, many of our cells are dying every second, and new cells are growing every second. So, if an experience happens to you now, the cells that will start growing 2 seconds from now are going to start relying in the DNA that was activated. But what happened to you before? In fact, it's been suggested that every 6 months or so we are the person that is reactive to what happened to us and those prior cells about 6 months ago. So we are constantly new, renewed people that are living through epigenetic based on what happened to us months before. It turns out our social experiences have an incredibly important impact on the DNA. So for the same reasons we talked about before, Wilson, Houghton, and with our evolutionary legacy, we've learned that if something happens to us that makes us feel rejected, then our bodies turn on specific DNA, and the DNA that's turned on has to do with our physical health. So again, let's think again about cave people. If you were a person that was living back in those times, one of the things that happened when you live with other of you found that you got a lot of colds. And the reason one is because viruses spread from human to human. So as long as you are interacted with other people, your DNA is activated to develop immunity to viruses. And all of the genes that help us to resist viruses as upgraded. In other words, they are kind of turned on. If you were part of a herd, there was much less of a chance that a dinosaur was going to come and eat your arm off. Therefore, you wouldn't have to have all of the inflammatory type of responsive in your body to quick heal that bleeding limb and keep you too safe. You won't need the kind of pro-inflammatory protection that much. Well, what happens is the minute we get rejected by others, we actually find that the genes that help us resist viruses become down-regulated. In fact, you can take a blood test 40 minutes later and find that you can see the sign of that so quickly. Meanwhile, the inflammatory responsive all upregulated. So of course, if something happens to you for a minute, detail, that doesn't mean we're going to have an inflammatory disease necessarily. But if you experience chronic rejection, also much time experience was of feeling that you are not part of the herd, you are not someone that is accepted and popular, then over time your cells will continually develop this up-regulated inflammatory response. So it turns out that popularity is actually changing the when that our DNA experiences. This has major implications for health, and it turns out that there are a way but that has a feedback loop into our brains, and it even changes our mood and our experiences too. And we'll talk about more of that later. So in summary, it's important to remember that one of the reasons why we seem to care so much about popularity is that our species thought about being in the head as something we needed for safety, and the minute that we lost popularity, our body is preparing us for what will happen when we kicked out all the hurt, and our brain is telling us with its most powerful single you and needing to do something to fix this. Go back to other. Do you can and be part of the group, and that's really important. Our DNA it changes. This is all very addictive, but unfortunately is not really helpful for us today in the million that we live in now. You can go out for a fun walk on your own and not get in but doing so unfortunately our bodies helping us in a way that would have been useful millions of years ago, but it's not necessarily helpful in today's society, and that's some of the reason why popularity plays such a huge role today. But it has effect on us that aren't necessarily what we would have wished for.